You are listening to WRUULP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with a global soul. Our theme music is a clip of Summer Nights by the Eric Jones Trio. It's provided by our friend Mark Chesanout, who plays with the Eric Jones Trio every Thursday and Sunday at Good Times Jazz Bar downtown.
Hey everyone, welcome to Arts on the Air. This is Tamara Garvey, and I am interviewing local artist and illustrator Charla Pettingill today. Welcome.
Hi, nice to have you.
Good to have
nice
you.
To be here.
I know it's funny finally meeting you. We've been friends on Instagram for a while.
Yeah, I actually came across your art years ago on Etsy. And at the time I had Alan Drummond as a professor at SCAD, and he mentioned you too. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm familiar with their work.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. What a small world. I love that. I'll start by reading a little blurb from your website. You are a published illustrator, surface designer, and illustration professor. You have 14 years of industry experience designing for print and pattern. And one interesting thing I saw on another interview you'd given, you said that you started thinking of art as a career in high school. Can you talk a little bit about how you, and then, so you came from Morristown, Tennessee to come to SCAD. I'm always really curious when people just like get the bug and art as a career that early in life. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh yeah, for sure. I started drawing as soon as I could hold a pencil. I feel like a lot of us creatives say that, but my family encouraged it, and it was something that I just did, and draw things for classmates and enter art competitions and use it to entertain myself. But when I got to high school, I had a couple of art teachers that were like, you could become a graphic designer, or one of my art teachers, Carol Rouse, at East High School in Morristown, Tennessee, worked as a graphic designer in Atlanta for a portion of her career. So that kind of opened my eyes to that path. And I got a course catalog for SCAD in the mail when I was a senior in high school. I was kind of thinking about going to a state school and studying art. And that was kind of the first time that I was made aware of art school as a path forward, and a college that was targeted to a creative career. So I looked through the course catalog, landed on illustration. I was like, that's it. That's what I want to do. And was accepted, got some scholarships and went. So I was the first person in my family to really go away to college,
Wow.
And a first generation college student. So yeah.
That must be interesting in your family as the first person to go up to college, and then it's such a non-traditional college environment. To go up to art school just is kind of foreign sounding for most people in general.
Yeah, there was some skepticism around it, but overall people were encouraging. My parents were encouraging.
What did you think of Savannah when you first arrived here?
Now, it's funny you ask. To me, it was a big city. Coming from Morristown, it felt like the big city. And I had a drawing professor in foundations at SCAD, and he was like, this is a small town. You have to, be cautious because people remember each other and they know who's who. And I just thought that was ridiculous because it seemed like a big city to me. But now, having spent time in Atlanta and coming back, I'm like, yeah, he was right.
Did you live in the dorms when you first got here?
I did, yeah. It was in Dyson House, which that's now where the Hive and the other dorms are located. But yeah, I had that experience and was in the dorms.
What year was it that you first arrived here?
2004.
2004. Okay. Do you remember much about how downtown felt, like what there was to do and art opportunities and things like that?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's amazing how much it's changed over the years. Even Broughton Street has changed so much just in terms of what's there, and how much more arts focused things are. We have so many cool boutiques and places like Paris Market on Broughton that are very art focused and just geared toward creatives, whether it's someone that's interested in interior design or a traditional take on the arts.
I saw there was another article you gave where you talked about how much you enjoyed life drawing when you were starting at SCAD. Can you talk a little bit about what it was that drew you into that?
Yeah, life drawing one was required for us. I think it still is for the illustration path. Yeah. And I just really loved that. I had a professor named Douglas Malone who really focused on a different method of life drawing, and where we would he called it the straight line technique, and we would block in the figure using straight lines and then kind of pull out the curves of the form. And I just thought that was so interesting, going from something that was more geometric to more organic. And I really enjoyed that. That really resonated with me. And as a child, I've drawn a lot. So my people was kind of a thing, and I really just took to that, really continued to do it. And then once I was in the Atlanta area, I would attend life drawing sessions in Marietta Cobb Museum of Art quite regularly. And then I went to another place. I think it was the Atlanta Artist Center. It was in Buckhead. once or twice, and it's just a nice way to unwind and to connect and network with other artists too.
Were there particular drawing materials that you really enjoyed?
Yeah, so it's funny, when I first started as an illustration major, I was really into markers, like Prismacolor markers and colored pencils. I think it was the things I had access to when I was in high school. And then I started turning my attention to things like gouache and oil, and then eventually digital media later in my time as maybe an upperclassman at
Yeah.
SCAD. I'd never used Photoshop when I was coming to SCAD. I never used digital media. Things are really different now. I think a lot of students start with the digital. They start Procreate on an iPad, or they start with Photoshop, and traditional is a new thing for them. But for me, it was things like marker and colored pencil, and then got into oil and gouache, watercolor, and then digital later on, Photoshop and Illustrator, and then in my career, I've worked predominantly digitally.
Yeah, I think gouache is interesting because I feel like if you hadn't gone through, I mean, the foundations classes at SCAD, I remember a lot of them required it. And if that hadn't happened, it's like you would almost never try it. It's kind of like this forgotten, weird sort of the hidden paint that people don't even think of to ever use.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned gouache, because that's one medium that I think gets overshadowed a lot. But a lot of the illustrators in the 1950s, kind of mid-century era, were using gouache. And if you go to the Jepson Center in Savannah, they've got some pieces that are part of their permanent collection that were done in gouache from 1950s, 60s, that era, that shows Savannah around time. And those were painted in gouache. It's very archival, and it's a great affordable medium, at least more so than oil paints and things like that. So I think it's a great one for people to use starting out.
Is that so? Artists in the mid-century that were using it in particular, was there like a were they doing it because they were responding to the limitations of some other paint at the time?
Yeah, and it's more opaque. I think it was better for flat, broad passes of color. Even Mary Blair, if you look at artists that were working for Disney, people like Mary Blair were using gouache, and it's pretty versatile too. You could work into it with things like colored pencils to add more dimension, but it's a fairly versatile medium. We even see brands like Rifle Paper Company and Rifle Bond, who is the creative director and artist behind that brand. She works in gouache. So all those beautiful florals that we see,
Yeah.
those are done in gouache. So it's sort of had a revival. And I
Oh,
think traditional media is having a revival in general as well.
I think I'd read somewhere that in your sophomore year at school, you had a freelance job illustrating a book. Can you talk
Yeah.
about that a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. So I was a sophomore at SCAD, and I distinctly remember I was in Muhammad Janawi's intro class. So I was in my very first illustration class at the time. And my mom had a friend named Valerie Perez, and she was writing a book, and it was called The Last Voyage of the Cosmic Muffin. And it was an autobiographical book about her experience leading the Peace Corps and taking a boat back to the U.S. from the South Pacific. And legal reasons she couldn't use photos, so she had me illustrate some of the key images that she wanted to include in the books. And I used charcoal and ink wash, kind of mixture of the two, to do those illustrations. And that was my first time getting published. So that was pretty exciting as a 19-year-old. The book was published in 2006. It's still out there on Amazon.
What was the publishing process like?
I believe it was an actual publishing house that did it. I can't recall which one, but
Yeah.
I do have a copy of the book somewhere at home.
That's cool. And you said it's still available on Amazon. So
Yeah,
if
you can
if you
actually go
buy
find
it,
it on Amazon.
are you still getting royalties from it if it sells now?
And no, it's actually just sort of a work for hire deal
Okay.
at the time. So yeah, no royalties in that case.
Can you explain? This is a good topic. Can you explain what work for hire means in a contract?
Yeah, so work for hire is basically a flat fee and full buyout of the artwork. And then if you're getting royalties, you are getting a percentage of the sales. Usually that's the wholesale rate. And that could be, it depends on the market. For something like publishing, it could be 2 to 6% on something like book illustrations. If you're licensing artwork to be used as wall art, like wall art you might find in a TJ Maxx or Home Goods, that could be as high as 10%. So that can be a good royalty rate. And then sometimes when you get into art licensing, that's a different ballgame. And that's mainly where I work now. It's you're letting someone rent out your artwork. So you're being paid a flat fee, and then you're getting royalties on top of that. So that's always a great deal. And you can license things out into multiple markets if that's what the agreement states.
Yeah, that is like I guess that's the illustration dream, right? Is that you're just getting money just indefinitely. What do they call it? Like passive income? Is that it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a big proponent of passive income. I think wherever you can leverage that, it's a great idea. And print on demand sites are great for that too. Things like Spoonflower and Society
Yeah.
6 and Redbubble.
Spoonflower is the site where you upload your art and then they print it onto fabric, right?
Yeah, they do fabric and wallpaper. And I think people are of the belief it's just repeat patterns, but it's also things like placement graphics for tea towels and calendars and things of that nature too. So even if you don't know repeat patterns, those are sites that you can leverage for passive income.
Did you mention when you talked about illustrating this book that she didn't have any photos, any reference photos to work from? Is that what you said?
Yeah, she was traveling and she had a few kind of lower quality photos, and for legal reasons, she couldn't actually have photos of someone in the book. So she had me create illustrations. I took some liberties and actually used my now husband as the model for the other person, the other character in the book. So yeah.
That's so interesting. Did she just have to sort of like describe to you what she was going
Yeah,
for? And you had to just
yeah,
conjure up entire images?
pretty much. Yeah,
That seems pretty unusual for an illustration job. So it's
yeah,
especially interesting you did that as your first gig in college.
yeah. I went from that to several years later doing a children's book. So very different content.
Oh, cool. When you were going through SCAD in the illustration program, was it when I went through it, it was like it was required that you take either book illustration or children's illustration. And there were maybe just one or two required digital art classes that we had to take. Was it like that for you too?
It was, yeah. So I think we were there around the same time. And I know that book illustration or children's book were the options for that class. And I ended up doing book illustration thinking I wanted to do something for adults because I'd just done Cosmic Muffin. And
Yeah.
then I ended up doing a children's book in the class. So I did a little accordion fold out book about Paris. And it was a lot of fun. I had Julie Lieberman for that class, and um, proud to call Julie a colleague to this
I
day
love,
now.
yeah, I had Julie Lieberman for that class too. And I did a book version of an illustrated version of Bridget Jones' Diary.
Oh, that's really cool. I'd love to see that sometime.
I still have it. What did you, so you, by the end, you were getting more into the digital art classes. Did you end up really delving into that once you took the first class? You just saw that that really struck something in you?
Yeah, I think I was a little hesitant at first just because I hadn't worked digitally other than, MS Paint as a kid. So, but I had a really great professor for those classes, and took the first class. It was electronic illustration one back then. Now we call it digital illustration. But that class focused on Photoshop and Corel Painter, which Corel Painter is one that not many people use nowadays, but it was a great one. I think it's kind of been surpassed by things like Procreate, but really took a liking to Photoshop and enjoyed Webster art. And then I took the optional electronic 2 class, which focused on Illustrator. And at the time, I wasn't a big fan of Illustrator. I think a lot of our students still feel that way. But in my career, I really delved into Illustrator, and that was something that I was expected to learn and use. And then I really started to enjoy it and found it really useful after it became necessary on the job.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty good at Photoshop and I use it every day. And I'd kind of dabbled in Illustrator and it feels very foreign and difficult to learn. Do you think that people tend to just whatever your brain pathway is, you tend to just really like
Yeah.
and take to one of those or the other?
Yeah, and I think for us as illustrators, it's ironic because the program is called Illustrator, and
Right.
that's really what it's intended for is illustration. But it is vector art, and I think people are of the mindset that you have to use the pen tool. My biggest tips would be blob brush tool. That's a game changer. That feels a little bit more intuitive. The keyboard shortcut for that is Shift B, and it feels more like you're painting and working in raster art, and you're going to actually create a shape. You can erase back into it with the eraser tool. And then the pencil tool, keyboard shortcut for that one is N. I always remember that because it's like number 2 pencil. And
Oh,
that one is a really great one to just draw organically or edit shapes you've already created. And you can use those 2 tools interchangeably and never touch the pen tool. So that's what I always tell my students is to utilize those 2 tools, at least when they're starting out in Illustrator. And then it's going to feel more like raster art. It's going to feel more intuitive. And that's how I work. I create some of my patterns and things in Illustrator, and I did my own logo and things in Illustrator, and
yeah.
I use those tools primarily.
Is the big benefit to using Illustrator instead of Photoshop just that from the beginning you're creating a file that can be scaled up as large as possible?
Absolutely. It can be scaled up and down infinitely. I always do an exercise where I'll just blow up a piece of art to a comical size with my students. I'm like, I could make this piece of art the size of this building and we're not going to lose
Yeah.
quality. It's a vector shape, so you don't have to worry about resolution. And in the industry, that was useful because you had artwork that would go from a greeting card to a jumbo gift bag for paper goods. I was in the greetings industry for a while. And that was really useful when you could scale artwork up and down for different products.
Yeah.
And also the printing processes with vector art, it's a little bit more conducive to a lot of the printing processes you encounter in the industry, like rotogravure printing, which is a process like screen printing. And you've got companies like Great Arrow Cards up in New England that hand screen print their greeting cards. And vector art is really conducive to that process because it's everything is more separated and clean. And with raster art, it's a little bit more of a process to color separate the artwork. You have to work in the channels in Photoshop, but vector definitely simplifies and streamlines that process. So for anyone that's starting out in digital art, they want to pursue a career, whether it's graphic design or surface design. I encourage everybody to make friends with Illustrator. You don't have to be best friends with Illustrator, but just get acquainted
really
with
hard
it.
to wrap your mind around the thinking of
Yeah.
Illustrator.
Yeah.
Do you think that most artists who are doing digital art, do people still start out their artwork with traditional drawing materials, or are people just like doing the entire thing on the computer, like either drawing with a Wacom tablet or whatever?
Yeah, Wacom. It's I hear both Wacom and Wacom, but I've been told it's Wacom. I still say Wacom personally, but it's a mix. I think with some of the younger students, they maybe started out drawing in Procreate when they were 8 years old, or I think the program's been around that long. Yeah, it has, and they've stuck with that. They maybe haven't used as many traditional art materials they might have in a high school art class, and then you get some people that started with traditional digitals, new and scary to them. So it really just depends on the person. But I do think we have more people starting out digitally, and that's their comfort zone, which
Yeah.
It's great to know digital, but I think it's important to know traditional as well, just to understand how these mediums behave. And even as a professional, you might be asked to create a brief using traditional media. Actually did some freelance work for an old friend yesterday who's still in the paper goods industry, and I was asked to use watercolor. So I created some gift wrap designs of pine trees using watercolor. So you never know when you're going to be asked to do traditional work as well.
It's so interesting that you say that you think a lot, like maybe a lot of students jump in and are really comfortable just with the digital art. Because I imagine like at that point in your degree, you've gone through all these foundations classes at SCAD, which are like charcoal and pencil and pastel and all the like messiest drawing materials. So it seems really foreign to me to think that like then you start in your major and you just immediately delve into computers. It feels like there would have to be a gradual shift to it, but maybe I just am like so traditionally based, so I can't even imagine.
Yeah. And I think the dry materials and foundations are maybe a little more comfortable, but when they get into paint, that can feel a little more intimidating. But I teach a class called Color with Intent, where we really try to, in addition to our materials and technique class that we offer, we try to offer them a wide variety of materials and increase their comfort level and just understanding how they behave and how to mix colors and achieve certain colors and understand the textures and how things might look when they're wet versus dry.
Yeah.
And it's really fun to see which media they kind of fall in love with, because even the students that are more hesitant with traditional media, they usually find something they like.
Do you so just kind of like staying on this book project that you had as a sophomore at college, because I'm so fascinated by this. I find whenever like the few commission jobs I've had with clients, there's always some big lesson that I've had to learn on them, that it's like you always kind of learn things the hard way about things, to including your contracts and just ways to communicate with people and ways to just like, you're communicating with somebody who might not be an artist and you have to talk about artistic concepts in like verbally. Do you remember any kind of like big lessons or like issues that came up when you were doing that first project as a student?
She was a very easy client, and
Okay.
really she just wanted imagery for this book that she could legally use. And her only feedback was that it needed to be black and white. So that really kind of had a big influence on the materials that I used, the charcoal and ink wash. And the pricing was really straightforward. I gave her a number and she was good with that. So and in that experience, it was pretty straightforward. But I have done other book illustration projects and other projects where maybe person was more well versed in design, so they might have more feedback. Or and then other projects too, again, where it was somebody who didn't have a design background, they weren't speaking the same terminology, so there was more back and forth.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to show preliminary work where you can, sketches. I did do that with Valerie, the author of Cosmic Muffin, showing thumbnail sketches and things, just like our process work in school, to show what you're thinking and to make sure you're on the same page and see if they have any feedback. But she was a great client. She was very straightforward.
That's wonderful. Did you so you finished your B.F.A at SCAD in 2008, is that right?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
correct. Yeah.
That's so funny. So that's actually the year that I finished my B.F.A in illustration too. And
Oh, wow.
I'd gotten another bachelor's degree in just like a traditional college before that. So when I was at SCAD, I was kind of non-traditional, like the classes that I was required to take and not living on campus and things like that. But I guess it was a pretty small department at that time. We must have seen each other in the building at least. It's funny.
It's so funny because it was a much smaller department at that time. It's really grown. We've got a lot of students now that are interested in illustration, which I love. And back then, it's rare that you didn't know somebody. And I've met a couple of other people in recent years that I never crossed paths with either. So, if you were taking different classes at different times, it's
Yeah.
funny how that works out. But then when I got my first job out of school, one of my coworkers, I went to interview for the job in Atlanta, and I think we had a class together. I met in the interview, and I was like, what are the odds?
Wow, that is wild. Yeah, I think because I didn't live in the dorms and I was just living off campus, that I didn't meet that many people in the department. I would just show up for class and then leave again. And so I was, and I was working and it felt kind of non-traditional. So you graduated magna cum laude. I'm reading for your site. That's amazing. And that you went straight into grad school. Was that to do with the economy was like at the time?
Yeah, yeah. And I knew I wanted to teach eventually one day. So that was part of my reasoning too. And then I was freelancing at the time too. I was starting to get some magazine work. That's really kind of where I started out, was mostly doing magazine work, spot illustrations, and did some work for a culinary magazine. And there was a magazine, a publication out of Nashville at the time called Her Nashville. It was kind of like Skirt magazine, if you remember Skirt. I
I
was doing
do.
some covers for them. Yeah. And so starting to get work. So, it kind of made sense to do that at the time and just kind of rolling through, and then went into the industry. So yeah.
So I remember at the very end of SCAD when we did like the professional practices class that we had to like send off for a packet of address mailing labels from somewhere in New York. And then we had to create actual printed out postcard and get them printed from Vistaprint or whatever, and then sit there and like sticker on mailing labels to art directors around the country and like send out this batch of postcards. And like that's what people would be doing to put your hat out and like get jobs. And that you were, I guess at the time, the industry standard is maybe you do that like seasonally, like 4 times a year, you do these postcards. And I remember us doing this for the end of this class right before graduation. And like within 6 months or a year, it felt like that was no longer the industry standard. Like suddenly it was going to be emails and things like that. Do you kind of have that memory as well?
Definitely. That I think we experienced the shift that happened around that time. And I think the economic situation at that time might have influenced some of it. Just things going more digital due to costs and the cost of promotional mailers and things like that. But we did see that shift kind of in action as we were coming out of school. We would do, I think it was, you probably had the same class that I did. I think it was a list that we would get from the David Goldman agency of all
Yes.
the
Yes.
contacts. Yeah, that was the one.
Crazy.
And then we go look at magazines and look at the masthead of the magazine to try to find the art directors. It was very manual, all of it.
Yeah.
And then you'd get your postcards, and we'd have a little ceremony where you'd go off to the postage box and drop them in and wish them well, and hope you got some work in return. And it's so interesting because now I'm glad you're mentioning this. I was just on a webinar with Chronicle Books. I'm a member of Illustrators for Hire, and we had a webinar with Chronicle a few weeks ago, and they were saying how much they love getting postcards now because for the last 14, 15 years, they really haven't gotten as many postcards. So they're discovering new illustrators that way. And it's
Wow.
a good idea to still send out a few postcards. So I've started ordering, maybe 25 postcards at a time, and I'll be really selective with who I want to send them to, 25 people that I would love to work with, and
Yeah.
I'll mail them out in addition to sending my emails and having my contact list. That I use Airtable for my contact list. I'm always growing it and building it. I've got thousands of contacts in them, and I really just kind of focus on the clients I really would like to work with. But I think keeping the digital contact list and emailing people in addition to sending out postcards is a good
Yeah.
strategy now.
What was that? I'm sorry. Can you repeat the program you used to organize your email
Yeah.
list?
Yeah, it's called Airtable, and it's there's an app that you can use for your phone, which is great when you're out in stores and you're maybe coming across brands and you want to track down the art director. You can add those to your list right then and there. And then there's the desktop version of it too, which is really useful if you're just curating your list and contacting people. But that's called Airtable. It's a lot like Excel, but it's
Yeah.
kind of nice. It has little reminders and different features that you can use.
So you said you're getting kind of specialized, like maybe 25 postcards made to send to your most desired people. Are these people you've worked with before, or you're like your aspirational art directors?
Aspirational. It's funny you mentioned people you've worked with before. There's one base of clients I have on list, and it's people I have worked with, and then I have another one that's kind of more, or two really. They're more aspirational. And then I have a list of agencies too, and that's for my students' reference too, just keeping track of different agencies. I've personally never worked with an agent, but I like to know who's out there. I'm kind of open to the idea eventually. Um, yeah, so those are kind of my different lists that I have divided up. So people that are aspirational, that's a much longer list, but
Yeah.
hey, shoot for the moon.
So they're the ones who are getting an actual postcard for them to stick up on their board and look at.
Yeah. Yeah. And the idea is it's going to be a piece of art they're going to want to display. So I like using Move for my postcards for that reason. They have a really great substrate for the postcards. They're just really nice quality.
It is pretty incredible to think about that for years that was the industry standard, that just every artist was getting, hundreds of postcards made, and just the sheer, like, the amount of paper being sent out and the amount of stamps is kind of incredible, just the scale of that.
Yeah, I think a good maybe happy medium between the physical postcard and the email is the tear sheet. So if you create a tear sheet or even a digital postcard and you email that out as a low res JPEG or PDF, and it's good to put it in the body of the email, just because some emails will bounce back if there is an attachment. You can send that out with a short introductory message, and that's a great way to get work, because then you're not spending money on postcards if budget's a concern, and then not printing paper if you want to be environmentally conscious. And then the tear sheet or the postcard's great because an art director can look at it, see who you are, see your headshot, and ideally, if that's on your tear sheet, and get a sense of the fact that you're a human, you exist. And they see your contact information, they see a link to your website, they see your work, they see what you do, and they can kind of make a decision then and there, or they can print that off if they want to print a copy, or just save a PDF in a folder on their desktop with artists to reach out to you in the future. And then they have it. So it's a great leave behind too for things like job interviews or trade shows.
So a tear sheet would be like a 1-page PDF that has your little bio and then a smattering of your images, and, like you said, possibly a headshot of you in your content.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is that David Goldman industry, is that still around? David Goldman agency?
The David Goldman agency is still around. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones that we learned about in school. Morgan Gainen and Associates. Let's see, what was another one? There were a few up in New York, but yeah.
It was so funny that David Goldman, that it's like sending off a self-addressed stamped envelope. Like, it was so old school, and then they just send you back this like packet of mailing labels. I wonder if they're still doing that aspect too. There was a funny they had selling those mailing lists.
Yeah. I wonder if they do. I'm not sure if they still sell the mailing list, but I would encourage everybody to build their own contact sheet. There's nothing wrong with purchasing a list if that helps you get a head start and get going. But I think you can really build a contact list of clients you really want to work with. I have a few dream clients, and I've really tried to be targeted with them in my lists. And if I'm purchasing a list, there might be clients in other markets that I'm not as interested in. So I think you get the most value when you're building your own client sheet.
Yeah, and I think that was great what you said about dividing it up by your aspirational people and the people you've worked with before, because it's going to be, a very different message that you're crafting to each of those. So that's smart. Okay, well, we're getting to a good halfway point. We're going to take a little station break, and everybody, again, I'm with Charla Pettingill, local illustrator and surface designer and illustration professor, and we will be back.
You are listening to WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with a global soul.
Trees are one of Chatham County's most treasured natural resources. Beyond their beauty and cultural significance, the impact of trees are far-reaching and compounding, spanning from economic benefits to health improvements to climate change resilience. Trees are woven into every aspect of our lives. Savannah Tree Foundation protects and grows Chatham County's urban forest through tree planting, community engagement, and advocacy. More information is available at savannahtree.org. This portion of WRUU's programming is brought to you by listeners and by Brighter Day Natural Foods. Brighter Day Natural Foods has been serving Savannah's healthy food and supplement needs since 1978. It is located at the corner of Bull Street and Park Avenue. They have online ordering and curbside delivery available, and now a walk-up window for smoothies, juices, and sandwiches from the deli. They are open from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Saturday, and 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. on Sunday. More information can be found at brighterdayfoods.com.
What does it mean when we say that WRUU is a community radio station? It doesn't just mean that we invite the community to create programming, and it doesn't just mean that we're a voice for the community. It also means that we're counting on the community to keep us going, and you are the community. Almost all of our modest budget comes from small annual or monthly donations from listeners like you. You get to enjoy our community-focused programming because many others have stepped forward to do their part. Now do your part by joining our community of listener donors. Go to WRUU.org right now and make a one-time or monthly donation. And thank you for supporting Savannah's community radio station, 107.5 FM.
From flappers to feathers, sequins to leathers, shabby to chic, and everything unique, WRU has the look in its Southern Speakeasy Fashion Show Saturday, September 30th from 7 to 10 p.m. Discover the Low Country's most creative designers and boutiques and help support the most unique radio station. The WRU Southern Speakeasy Fashion Show at King Oliver's Creole Jazz Bar, 514 MLK Boulevard in Savannah, Saturday, September 30th from 7 to 10 p.m. Tickets available at eventbrite.com.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Arts on the Air. This is Tamara Garvey and I'm with Charla Pettingill. Welcome back, Charla.
Hey.
So when we went to the break, we had been talking about, we were kind of coming to, you finished your MFA at SCAD, magna cum laude in illustration, and then you went back to school for an MA, is that right?
Yeah, B.F.A and then MA, and then finished that degree in 2009.
2009. How so I think while you were in SCAD, you started getting some like exhibition opportunities around Savannah. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I did a solo show at a little place called Cafe Smooth that was on Bull Street years ago. It was a little smoothie shop owned by a wonderful lady named Susan Jaffe. And she was like, hey, why don't you show your art in the shop? And she would do little art shows and artist features from time to time. So that was a lot of fun and a little opening night, and had some original pieces that sold, which was exciting. That felt great, as a student that people wanted to buy some originals and prints too. So that was a success. And then my graduate group, the MA students I was graduating with, we had our solo show too, or our group show that was called Point of View. And that was held at I'm trying to remember which SCAD building it was, but we were on campus for that show, and that was a lot of fun too, just to come together and showcase our work. And we had postcards, and some of us were displaying prints and things like that too.
Yeah.
So yeah. And then in undergrad, I also was part of a show for a class called Drawing on a Theme that was taught by Joy Flynn, and we had a show for that class too. And that was at I think it was on Henry Street, if I'm not mistaken, but it was a space that was owned by a local church.
I had Joy Flynn as well. She was so influential. She was great.
I love her. She's great. I still keep in touch with Joy. She was one of my favorite teachers and so encouraging, so knowledgeable. Really loved her.
Do you remember so the class was drawing on a theme. Do you remember what your theme was? I know it's a long time ago.
Yeah. Oh, I'm glad you asked. It was one of my favorite projects that I did as a student. It was kind of a mixture of drawing and collage, and the criteria for the class, we had to draw in some capacity. So I went around to coffee shops and would sketch people, and then I would create sort of a collage around the perimeter of the drawing based, using found objects and things from the store that used to be in Savannah called Peddler Gems. And it was, they would let you fill up a bucket of like junk jewelry, and it was like $5 to buy. So I was getting old photos and tintypes and pieces of jewelry and brooches and things, and collaging them around the perimeter of the drawings to kind of form a story about the person in the drawing, and, not knowing anything about them, or to at least get the viewer to form a story about them. And there ended up being 6 pieces in that collection, and I built some wooden frames around them and displayed them at that gallery show. And I still have the drawings. The frames got a little bulky and had to discard those after a couple of moves. So, there's some damage to them, but I still have the drawings, and they're still really special to me.
I was going to ask you, they sound delightful. I was hoping you still had them around.
Yeah. I've got pictures too. I'll have to share them with you.
These various shows that you had, were you working on paper at the time and then you had to frame it, or what was your actual work like?
Yeah, these were watercolor paper, and I was staining them with tea and coffee and then drawing on them with I think I was using Conte pencils for that particular body of work.
Yeah. Did you that process of being a gallery artist and having these physical things up to sell? Did you think about going in that direction at all, or what did you think?
At that point in time, yeah, definitely in undergrad. I took one painting class with Henry Dean, who's still at SCAD, and I really like the idea of being in a gallery. It's you feel a sense of pride in your work. It's fun to have it on display and see people enjoy it and see how they interact with it. And that's a process I enjoy. I haven't done as much of that in the last 15 years, but at the time I did enjoy that a lot. And that's something I'd be open to doing again now that I'm in kind of more of an art focused community.
You said so when you started the MA program at SCAD, you had been imagining that you wanted to teach eventually.
Mhm.
Were you picturing have a career like what you have now, where it's like a hybrid of being a professor and having your own practice? Is that what you were shooting for?
I don't think it crossed my mind. I think I knew that I wanted to freelance. I knew I wanted to have a career in the arts, but I thought it was something I would do much later, maybe even in retirement. So I like that I can be as active in the industry as I am now while teaching, and I think it's kind of the best of both worlds.
Yeah. So, and when you graduated with your MA, you didn't go immediately into teaching. You moved to Atlanta and you started working in the industry, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So I went to Atlanta. I got a job at a small kids and family marketing company, and I was doing illustrations for collateral for kids' meals for restaurants, fast food restaurants primarily. They call them quick service restaurants. And so I always tell people Happy Meals, but not specifically McDonald's. It was a lot of other clients out in the industry, Buffalo Wild Wings, Hard Rock Cafe, Sonny's Barbecue. We had a portfolio of about 15 different restaurants at any given time. And so we were doing like the kids' meal activity books and thermoform cups and things like that. So I did that for about 4 years. And I learned a lot about different printing processes, things like spot color versus CMYK and different substrates like a thermoform cup where you're using spot colors versus a placemat where you're using CMYK art. So there was a lot of learning about that and working with suppliers in the US and abroad as well. And different licensed properties. We were licensing properties like Crayola and Hasbro and others. So, working with a style guide and understanding how that works. It was almost sort of a graphic design illustration hybrid in that role.
Yeah. You mentioned the word collateral. Can you kind of define that for people?
Yeah. So um, things, marketing materials. So that could be speaker box POP. So when you drive through at a fast food restaurant, the art promoting the kids' meal that you see, that would be an example of part of the collateral. Also, the kids' meal placemats, activity books, crayons,
Mm.
cups, paper crowns. Sometimes there are paper crowns, like if you go to Buffalo Wild Wings and restaurants like that. So we did a wide range of things. Sometimes there were the toys and stickers and things you would get in a kids' meal too. So some of those were plastic toys, kind of the chunkier things, and sometimes it was something like a sticker.
It's so funny, these things, it's so specific. It's things that the average person would never think about how much time and effort and people are involved in like creating the art for, literally just part of the drive-through picture.
Yeah. There are several companies that focus on that industry and do that type of work, and that was just one of them. So yeah, again, we're surrounded by illustration every day. And, if it's a pattern or a clothes or a phone case, or if it's something on our t-shirt, like the t-shirt I'm wearing today, or something on a kid's water bottle. My niece is 5.5, and she had a little water bottle with a repeat pattern on it. I'm like, there you go. We're just surrounded by it every day.
So when you got that first job, and it sounds like very, very technical, did they, and you were entry level, were they expecting you to come in like knowing a lot about having to do that? Or did you learn on the job? Like, what is that like, your first job out of college?
Yeah, I was worried I would be expected to know it, but you really learn on the job. And school sets the foundation. You're given the tools, and you learn to think creatively. And then a lot of that industry knowledge just happens on the job, and they understand that you're coming in, maybe not knowing the specifics to their specific niche or industry. So a lot of it happens on the job, and there's a learning curve of probably 6 months, maybe sometimes a year, depending on how technical the job is. And there's the understanding that maybe you're an illustrator versus a graphic designer, or a hybrid of both. And I think for illustrators, it's good to know some basic typography and to be friends with Adobe Illustrator, as I mentioned before. Those are good skills to have just coming in. They're going to give you a leg up.
And I know your career now, it's a lot of repeat pattern design, and we were in SCAD at the same time. And I don't remember there being any repeat pattern teaching in the illustration department. I did take one fibers class, and because I had kind of heard that there was sort of a lot of crossover possible in that. And at the end of that fibers class, we did repeat pattern design. And I remember it was in my last quarter at SCAD, and I loved that so much and was like, oh, I wish I'd started this earlier and learned more about surface repeat pattern design. Did you learn any of that while you were in SCAD, or was it all after graduation?
It was really, most of it was after graduation. I did get some exposure to it. In hindsight, I wish I'd taken a fibers course, but I did have a class with Linda Warner where we had the option of doing a repeat pattern. We did it the old-fashioned way on paper, with just kind of having things seam up, and done it in watercolor. It was very large format, and in hindsight, it probably didn't repeat that well. But now in the program, we have different concentrations, which I love, and one of those concentrations is surface design. So the students can choose concept art, publication, art for entertainment, or surface design. And I think students are becoming more and more aware of all of the different applications for surface design. I mean, it's tech, things like phone cases, it's apparel and accessories, it's wallpaper, it's sewing fabric. That's a huge market for surface design. Gift wrap and greeting cards, another area I worked in before. It's so many different products, and Ruggable is one company that has hired SCAD alumni. So if we think about flooring, floor coverings, whether it's a rug or it's vinyl flooring, those are all examples of surface design. It's all illustrations. So surface design is any artwork or illustration used for decorative purposes, and that encompasses a lot of things. So I think that's a market that's growing a lot, and I think our students are starting to realize that. We're helping them to see the opportunities too.
So now when people go through the illustration program at SCAD, you pick one of these 4 tracks to go on to? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, when we did it was just illustration.
Yeah, same. It was smaller, but I think illustration is really broad now, more so than ever before. It's an exciting time to be an illustrator because you see students getting jobs in so many different areas. Some are going into illustration for animation, where they're illustrating the assets that characters in the animated series might hold, or things in the backgrounds. Florida County Productions is a company in Atlanta that produces the show Archer. So we have some alumni working there doing that type of work, and at WB in California. But then we have people that are going to work for Ruggable, designing patterns and illustrations for rugs. So it's really broad, and it's exciting to see where the students end up and then where they find their passion too. Because we have some that are like, I really want to do concept art starting out, which is any artwork for conceptual use for games and animation and TV shows and things like that. But then maybe they switch to surface design. They take a surface design elective, and they're like, yeah, I really love this, but maybe I'm going to do really rendered motifs in my patterns because that's kind of how I've worked as a concept artist. And then there's overlap between them. So I'm always like, you don't have to fully commit. You can pivot later if you want to, or you can do a little bit of both. I think there's a lot of overlap between surface design and publication.
It's so interesting you talk about this, because my memories of when I was at SCAD, which was 2005 to 2008, is at graduation, like really the track you were going into was to be pitching your art to like get it published in print magazines or maybe digital magazines. It was like literally that was what illustration was. And it was like a tiny, the major was tiny. There weren't a lot of people, or maybe you'd be a children's book illustrator, but that seems pretty few and far between. So when I moved away for years and then I came back to Savannah and learned that illustration was one of the largest majors at SCAD. And I just remember being shocked because I was like, kind of print magazines have kind of died out. How on earth can this be a big major and a big track to go into? Because like my experience of it was that it was just very limited. So it's kind of just fascinating hearing you say all these, like, just how broad and how much it's touched over into like what I would think of as graphic design, and it's touched over into video gaming and just all these other fields.
Yeah, there's overlap between illustration and animation. There's overlap between illustration and film, between illustration and graphic design and advertising. Yeah. I mean, and even when you get into fashion illustration or architectural rendering and illustration, I know my husband is an architect. He's also a SCAD alumni. He went through the architecture program and graduated at the same time as me. And he was at a networking event recently, and there was an architecture firm there saying they hired a SCAD illustration alumni last year who's doing visualization for doing architectural drawings and for signage at like historic sites and nature centers and things like that. So there are even applications like that in architecture and other industries, interior design, visualization in those areas. Where it comes in handy in product design too. When you think about toys and plush, there's a company north of Atlanta where a few of my coworkers in the industry had worked designing plush toys, big teddy bears and things. So yeah, there are just so many different applications. I could go on and on about it all day.
That's it. Yeah, but yeah, when you talk about it that way, I'm like, okay, it makes sense that it would be in the top 5 majors at SCAD. That's fascinating. Yeah. I did kind of want to touch on in your art. When I look at your website, as the nature of being an illustrator and you've worked for all these different clients, at first I was like, how would I describe it? Would I say, oh, she does a lot of food artwork, but then it moved on and it would be like sailboats or lipsticks or animals or things like that. So I wondered, when you have like as many years of experience as you have in doing illustration, what is your like elevator pitch that you'd use to describe your art? Because like subject matter wise, you can do everything, you know?
I like to listen to the keywords that art directors and outsiders use when they look at my work. And I have a little list where I jot down those keywords. And when I'm giving my elevator pitch, I like to kind of repeat some of them back, relating to what people are experiencing when they're seeing the work. So for me, it's playful, joyful, colorful, fresh, modern. Those are some of the words that I've heard. So in my pitch, when I'm emailing art directors, I always keep it short and sweet, just a couple of sentences. But I'll say playful, joyful work, or I
Yeah.
like creating artwork that brings other people joy or makes them smile. And that's really what it's about, because all of it for me is based on personal experiences. The lipstick pattern, maybe that's my favorite lipstick. If it is a pattern of cookies, I just had a really great cookie one day. So I try
Yeah.
to base everything on personal experiences, find experience or find inspiration in just my daily life. But then when I take a trip too, that's great. I always tell the students, to find inspiration, you have to step outside of your daily routine and do something that you don't normally do. But then you can also find inspiration in your daily routine too.
Do you have any subject matter or types of things that you just really enjoy drawing? You just really like depicting them the most?
Yeah, animals, food, those are obviously some of my most common subject matter. Um, I love doing things like little terrariums. So I love terrariums. I like this idea of little enclosed worlds. So I do a lot of terrariums, even if they were sort of trendy, really on trend for a little while, but I still
Yeah,
enjoy them. Snow
like
globes,
cottage
things of that
core
nature.
is the thing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Little
Cottage core is
white
still a thing, and it's
mushrooms and elves.
yeah, cottagecore is kind of morphing into like a cozy cabin sort of trend. And
Yeah.
then there's fairycore, where it's a little bit more fantastical with fairies
Wow.
and mushrooms and things like that. So yeah, it's funny how trends just they peak at something, but then they kind of evolve into something else, and they
Yeah.
stick around in that capacity.
Okay, so you spent a number of years in Atlanta working full time for a job. How did you come back to Savannah? How did you come into being a professor?
Yeah. So I was in the kids and family marketing industry for about 4 years, then moved into the paper goods industry. I was designing gift wrap and greeting cards. I did that for about 3.5 years. And then I went to work for a company called Shaw, just north of Atlanta, designing flooring. A colleague of mine had gone from paper goods to flooring. And I was like, wow, I didn't realize I could use my skill set for something like flooring, but flooring gift wrapper manufactured the same way, just on a different scale. It's a process called rotogravure printing. So I went to work for Shaw, had some really awesome travel experiences, got to travel to Asia twice, traveled all around the US. And it was cool to design product that really people live their lives around, and it impacts them in a way they don't even realize. Flooring is installed for 15 or 20 years, and you can get really creative with it. I designed one collection at Shaw Contract that was two visuals, a concrete visual and a terrazzo visual, and actually designed the terrazzo visual using Illustrator. So that was vector art that I used for that pattern. And I've got some of that material now. I'm going to install it in my kitchen. There's
Oh,
this gray barn board LVT I'm going to replace with a terrazzo. It's kind of a mid-century house. So it'll be something a little more modern. But, even flooring can be illustrious and have a story. They have, at Shaw Contract, they have another collection that's inspired by deconstructed typography, letter forms. And when you go into the Gen Library at SCAD, you'll actually see that carpet installed there. So Shaw does a great job of telling stories with their collections and making them, illustrious. So I really enjoyed that. I did that for a little over 5.5 years, actually worked my way into a director position. And, I was spending a lot of time commuting, and I was finding that what I liked the most in my day-to-day job was when we had contact with young people that would come in that were interested in creative careers, whether they were trainees or it was customers on meal tour, and we were telling them about what we do. Sometimes we would have high schoolers or college students come in and kind of job shadow or do a tour. And I really loved explaining the creative process to them and seeing their eyes light up because they saw the potential in what they could do in something like flooring that maybe doesn't seem exciting, but here's how it can be creative and exciting. And I really love doing training sessions. I filmed some training videos and things for our employees. And, I kind of went back to this idea of what I thought about in grad school that I would like to teach eventually one day. And I've always missed Savannah. I love Savannah. Atlanta's a great place, a lot of cool things to do. But let's face it, there's a lot of commute time and things that happens when you're in a bigger city. So I'm from a really small town originally. So I was like, slightly calmer pace would be nice and not commuting as much. And then the opportunity came about at SCAD to come back and teach. And I was like, absolutely. It was a big shift, but I feel it's been a really great one for me. It's been great to come back to Savannah. SCAD and the students have been just wonderful. And yeah, I've never been happier. And it's nice
Oh.
to be doing freelance work and licensing work on the side as well.
What year did you come back to Savannah?
2022. So it's been a year, exactly a year.
Did you start out as a foundations professor, or did you go right into the illustration?
I went right into illustration. So I was selected because of my surface design experience in particular, and offering that perspective and that experience to the students. So yeah, I started out teaching introduction to illustration, color with intent, and historical and contemporary illustration as well.
Did that feel surreal to now be just working alongside? A lot of the same professors are still there.
A couple of them are, yeah. We've got two that were at least ones that I had that are still there, and so that was a little surreal. And it's been great to be back. It's really wonderful to see the creativity of the students. It's so fun to give them a brief and to see what they come back with, and just to help them, to give them insights from the industry, things that would have helped me out at that age too if I'd known about them. And then also just to see the creativity. I think the creativity level was so impressive when we were there, but now I feel like it's even greater. It's just amazing to see what they do. I'm like, you all are ready for the industry.
What are a couple of the top lessons that you had to learn in your working with clients?
When working with clients, it's really important to be timely and to stay in communication, respond quickly, and just to meet your deadlines. You always have to remember your clients are trying to meet a deadline too. If it's an art director, they have a deadline. That's why they're seeking you out to create art to meet a certain deadline. So you want to help them meet their deadlines as well. So be a good communicator, meet your deadlines. I've never missed a deadline personally, but that's something to strive toward. Is under promising and over delivering is always a good idea. And then really, I think, again, just showing process work, showing sketches or thumbnails, and a visual example of where you're headed. Because, if someone that you're working with doesn't have a creative background, and that's okay, they might communicate a little differently. They might not speak the same language and use the same industry terminology that we might use. So the more clearly you can communicate, if it's visually, that's a great idea.
Have you ever had the experience where there's a client who just can't decide, and you kind of keep giving them thumbnails or sketches and they keep going back and forth, and you're just doing a lot more work for something than you really should be doing? How do you kind of work your way through that?
That's a great question. There's a book called The Paradox of Choice, and it's about when you show someone really kind of a client-facing or customer-facing situation too many choices, it can overwhelm them. But if you only show one or two choices, maybe it's not enough. So I think it's a matter of finding the sweet spot in terms of how many choices you offer them, and then applying their feedback, but then using your expertise as well. So rather than showing 2 options or 10 options, maybe it's a good idea to show 4 or 5 options.
Okay, that's a good sweet spot.
Yeah.
What do you think for students who are looking to go into illustration? What do you think are some really growing areas within the field?
Surface design is a big one for sure, just because, as we discussed, there's so many different applications, and it doesn't always have to be a repeat pattern. It's anything for decorative purposes. So it could be t-shirt art like this. This is surface design. It could be something like on my bag here. I've got a tote bag with there's florals, and then this is called a placement graphic or a spot illustration. It's just a little illustration of birds on the bag surrounded by repeat patterns. So surface design is something where you don't even necessarily have to know how to make patterns. It's great if you do. But if we think about wallpaper, if we think about upholstery for furniture, if we think about apparel, kids apparel is a huge area too. We see so much kids apparel and children's accessories these days, baby clothing, things of that nature. There are a lot of employers that create that type of work. So Carter's in Atlanta is a popular employer for SCAD alumni, but then we also get a lot of mom and pop companies that are popping up, and they're doing kids clothing and things of that nature. And then also things like greeting cards and gift wrap. I think that there is a hunger for things that are handwritten and have a personal touch. So greeting cards have really kind of had a resurgence, and there are a lot of companies like Design House Greetings, Red Cap Cards, and Great Arrow up in New England that are doing greeting cards. These smaller companies are kind of growing and forming and starting paper goods. So I think there's always an opportunity in that. And then also one area that we're really seeing a lot of growth in is animated illustration. So as we know, these days people are scrolling social media and their attention spans are probably shrinking. So I think whenever you can add movement to your illustrations, it's going to get people's attention. So we actually have a required course in our curriculum now called animated illustration. So it's not really necessarily learning how to animate, but it's adding movement to illustrations using Photoshop and Procreate and After Effects. And that's something we see a lot in editorials. So now if you go to a website like NPR or Washington Post, you'll see an illustration, but it might have some movement and certainly things that we see on social media. So knowing how to create frame by frame animation is a useful skill. And that's something I think is going to continue to grow with editorial and those applications. And you discussed magazine illustration and kind of how that market has shrunk over the years. But it's really, I think a lot of those illustrations have just gone online. There are accompanying articles online. Refinery 29 is another site where you might see illustration as well as animated illustration. So that's an area of growth that I see. And then almost a 3D appearance to 2D illustration. So programs like Blender, that's something that people are using to create sort of dimensional three-dimensional illustrations. So some of our students are starting to experiment with that. We're dabbling in it ourselves. And I'll be curious to see if that becomes part of the curriculum. But 2D illustrations that appear 3D, that's another trend. So I think you pay attention to the advertising and things you're seeing out in the world, because you'll probably see some examples of that coming about. And I think that's something that experimenting with Blender, which is a free program that you can download, could be a good way to get some exposure to that.
Yeah. What percentage of your day and your work is spent either like being a professor or doing your own commissioned artwork? What is your balance like?
Yeah, so most of my time goes toward being a professor, teaching in class and office hours, and then any events and things like that we're participating in, extra help sessions, field trips or study trips, things of that nature. But then on the weekends, I try to devote, a morning or two to sending out emails to potential clients, to creating artwork. I always try to devote at least some portion of the day, whether it's 5 minutes or an hour, to drawing and creating new work.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a good balance though. I like that it's multifaceted and no 2 days are exactly alike.
I did want to ask you, you had a cool feature in 2021. You were in apartment therapy. They did a blog post that was 10 day planners. I'm sure you must have gotten a lot of traffic from that. How did that come about? Did they just find you?
Yeah, it was really random. It's interesting how that happened. I was really active on Minted for a while, and a friend of mine is as well. And she encouraged me to get on Minted. And I had 2 designs that were winners. One was a jury pick, and one was an actual prize winner. But that jury pick was that notebook design. It was a repeat pattern I did using ink, actually, and I took the ink drawings and vectorized them and did this pattern of oranges. And citrus fruit is kind of an ongoing trend. It has been for a while. I guess it kind of has a lot of broad appeal. It's summery, it's fresh, it's appealing, no pun intended. And so I'd done that orange pattern and put it on a journal for one of their stationery challenges. And it was a jury pick. And, it's great on Minted. If you're a jury pick, you get a flat fee payout, and then you get royalties on each piece that sells. Cool. And then randomly, I just, I was tagged and saw that feature was posted, and it was planners to start your year out, and it was alongside people like Raff Paper Company and Morgan Harper Nichols, and they credited me too and listed my name, not just say we found this on Minted. So that was really, really cool. I'm a huge apartment therapy fan, so I geeked out pretty hard when I saw that.
That's amazing. I love that. I had a similar thing. I one day just a card I had done showed up in a blog post on the Huffington Post, and yeah, you don't tell you ahead of time. You just suddenly are having all this traffic. Yeah, it's really cool. Let's see. Do you we're kind of coming to the end of the interview, and I did want to ask, do you have any what's coming up for you? Any dream people you want to work with? Any dream projects or like products that you'd like to delve into?
Oh, for sure. So right now I'm excited about another fabric collection I'll have coming out with Paintbrush Studio Fabrics. I've licensed 2 collections with them. The first one was called Coffee Talk. It's kind of coffee and cake and sweets themed. And then I had a second collection that launched more recently called Backyard Bugs. That's all bug themed. It's inspired by being a kid catching bugs in East Tennessee, Luna moths, fireflies, caterpillars, things of that nature. It's kind of a fun one. It's been a good seller for them because I think it's something a little different. It's gender neutral. It could be for, people quilting, making baby quilts or baby clothing for little boys or girls, and kind of broad appeal. And then
the gender neutral thing seems like that must be just a huge marketing for people to be adept at, right?
that's another market opportunity too, just things that
Yeah.
have broad appeal to everyone. And then there's another collection that I'm excited about that'll launch next year that is fall cooking themed. So that one I'm excited about, and hopefully do some more collections with them. I've really come to enjoy doing sewing fabric, and you can find paintbrush geo fabrics at Savannah Fabric Company on Oglethorpe Square, just behind the Gin
great.
Library in Broughton. So that I don't know if they carry any of those specific collections yet, but they do carry that brand.
I love that people can shop locally and find this. That's
Yeah,
great.
absolutely. And Sally Shake at Savannah Fabric Company is awesome. She's so
Right, well,
welcoming. She's got a great environment.
Well, definitely include these upcoming collections of your fabrics, and then this or the repeating orange themed of the journal. I'll include those photos when I post about you. That's so great.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much, Charla. I really appreciate it. This has been so interesting, all your industry terms and everything. It's a little different for people to hear about it, and I'm excited for people to be like seeing your art online and just seeing representative of what we've been talking about.
Great. Yeah, thanks for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Next up on WRUU, That Old Savannah Magic from 4 to 6 p.m. It's a variety show featuring Savannah history, radio theater, interviews, and music.
You are listening to WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with a global soul.